He had no website, no social media, no business card. And when a television production company came looking for him, the only way they could track him down was through his wife. That man is Chase Morrill, master builder, contractor, and the face of one of the most quietly beloved renovation shows on American television. And the story of how he went from a completely off-grid contractor to the star of a 13-season franchise, with a federal investigation, an Italian farmhouse, and a bed and breakfast along the way, is not the story most people think they know. By the end of this, you'll understand exactly who Chase Morrill is, what he's been building when the cameras weren't rolling, and why the most important decision of his career had nothing to do with television. He didn't just grow up in Maine. He's been there, in one form or another, for 10 generations. Chase Morrill was born on December 25, 1977, in Augusta, Maine, to Eric and Peggy Morrill. His father, Eric, was a builder. His grandfather was a civil engineer. His grandmother handled the plumbing on family projects. Chase has described his earliest memory of construction as being about 5 years old when his grandparents rebuilt the family camp. He was there for it, watching, handing tools over, learning without knowing he was learning. That dynamic defined everything that came after. Maine wasn't just where Chase lived. It was what shaped every instinct he had about how buildings should work, what materials last, and what gets wasted. The family's approach was centered on what he later called wastelessness, his father's philosophy, which Chase has said was passed down like a value system, not just a trade skill. He grew up in the Augusta-Gardner area, the middle of central Maine, a stretch of river towns where cabin culture isn't a lifestyle brand, it's just life. Camps on lakes, old structures, things that needed fixing, things worth keeping. What's less discussed is what Chase did when he left Maine for the first time. He went to the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, a small liberal arts school on the coast, and earned a degree in community planning. That's not carpentry school. That's not a trade program. It's urban planning, land use, environmental design, the kind of degree that focuses on how communities function, how space serves people, and what gets lost when old things are torn down instead of preserved. That degree explains more about Chase Morrill, the television personality, than any renovation skill does. He has never been interested in turning cabins into showpieces. He has always been focused on function, what a camp is actually for, who uses it, and how to return it to service rather than redecorate it. That philosophy has a name in community planning. In Maine cabin culture, they just call it common sense. After college, he came straight back to Maine and started doing the work. Small renovation jobs, abandoned properties, old structures that most contractors would have leveled. And here's what the whole story starts to turn on. He co-founded a construction company, Kennebec Property Services, with his sister Ashley, her husband Ryan Eldridge, and 2 friends he'd known since the Augusta-Gardner area growing up, Matt Dix and Jared Baker. His people called them Dixie and Jedi. Everyone who knew the crew knew who they were. Everyone else had no way of finding them at all. Chase Morrill, when the show first started, had no website, no Facebook page, no Instagram, no presence of any kind on the internet. If a client wanted to hire him, they usually had to call Sarah, his wife, a registered nurse, and ask her to pass the message along. That was the business model. Word of mouth. Maine network. You knew someone who knew Chase, or you waited until you did. That matters for reasons beyond the obvious. It means Chase was never looking for exposure. He wasn't building a brand. He wasn't positioning himself for television. He was working, taking on projects he believed in, and operating entirely in the world of people who already knew him. In 2016, a production company out of Denver, called Dorsey Productions, was looking for a Maine-based renovation crew to build a show around. A family friend put them in touch with Chase. He took the call out of curiosity, he has said. Not ambition, not strategy, just wanting to know what they had in mind. They asked if he'd film a pilot. He said yes. They shot it at a pondside camp in Vassalboro, Maine. DIY Network picked it up for 10 episodes. That first season ended in March 2017. When Chase told his crew what was happening, that they were going to be on television, they thought he was joking. That was, apparently, a reasonable assumption, because Chase was known for making jokes on the job. When they realized he was serious, they sat down and talked about it, and they agreed to try it. The crew that assembled for that first season wasn't a cast. It was just his people, the same ones he would have been working with if the cameras had never showed up. And if you think the difference between the show and the business was just a matter of a film crew following them around, the next part reframes all of that. Maine Cabin Masters debuted on the DIY Network on January 2, 2017. It wasn't a tentpole launch. It wasn't a marketing campaign, it was a renovation show built around a contractor who didn't even own a smartphone in any meaningful way. It became the #1 show on the DIY network. Not in its category. On the entire network, across its first 3 seasons, Maine Cabin Masters was the highest-rated program on the channel. By season 3, it had cleared 3.5 million viewers. Those numbers, for a niche renovation show on a cable network that isn't in everyone's basic package, are not modest. They're the kind of numbers that make networks sign renewals before the current season finishes airing. What drove those ratings wasn't spectacle. There's no drama manufactured between the cast. Nobody's crying in a confessional booth. Nobody's going over budget in a way that creates a cliffhanger. What the show gave viewers was something much harder to produce. A sense that the people on screen genuinely would be doing this work, regardless of whether a camera was pointed at them. Chase has said exactly that, in almost those exact words. He told a reporter early on, "If we weren't doing this on TV, we'd still be doing this." He gestured at whatever cabin they were working on and said, "If the show gets picked up for more seasons, great. If it doesn't, great. There's no shortage of work." That indifference to television success, real or performed, became the show's central personality. The brother and sister dynamic between Chase and Ashley, Ryan as the quiet carpenter, Jedi and Dixie as the irreplaceable veteran carpenters who've been part of this crew since long before a single camera ever arrived. These weren't characters, they were just who these people were. By the time the show moved to the Magnolia Network in 2022, it had already done something that most renovation shows never achieve. It had built an audience that wasn't watching for the renovations, they were watching for the people. But something else happened in 2022, something that didn't air in a sponsored segment or show up in a press release. The renovation work in question happened in 2020. 5 properties, all built before 1978. And Kennebec Property Services, the legal entity behind Maine Cabin Masters, did not follow the federal lead paint safety protocols required when working on pre-1978 homes. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has a rule called the Lead Renovation, Repair and Painting Rule, the RRP rule. It exists because homes built before 1978 were constructed when lead-based paint was legal. And when you renovate those structures, you can release lead dust that is dangerous, particularly to children. The rule requires contractors to be certified, assign certified renovators to each project, and inform homeowners of the risks before work begins. Kennebec Property Services allegedly failed on all of those fronts across 5 2020 renovation jobs. No proper certification at the time. No documentation that required protocols were followed. No evidence homeowners were given the required safety information before work started. The EPA initiated a formal investigation. The case moved through 2021 and into 2022. New seasons of Maine Cabin Masters kept airing throughout. In October 2022, the company settled. The penalty was $16,500. The violations were formally resolved. As part of the settlement, Kennebec was required to obtain the RRP certification it should have already held, feature lead safety information in at least 3 upcoming episodes of the show, produce a podcast episode on lead safety through their From the Woodshed program, and post compliance information on their website. The EPA's announcement noted that television renovation shows have a particular responsibility, that when millions of people watch skilled tradespeople work, those tradespeople are, whether they intend to be or not, setting a standard for what safe practice looks like. What's worth noting is that this was not unique to Maine Cabin Masters. The EPA had settled similar RRP enforcement cases against Magnolia Homes, 2 Chicks and a Hammer, Texas Flip and Move, Rehab Addict, and Bargain Mansions, all shows on the same network family. It was a broader enforcement sweep targeting renovation television. Maine Cabin Masters was one case among several. The show addressed it, turned it into viewer education, and kept working. Here's what the settlement forced that the show had never done publicly before. And it's the reason this part of the story matters more than the fine. To understand what Chase Morrill builds, you have to understand what he lost. Eric Morrill, Chase's father, died of cancer on July 27, 2014. Chase was 36 years old. The show hadn't started yet. The business was still Kennebec Property Services, operating out of Wayne, Maine, with no internet footprint and no television deal on the horizon. Eric wasn't just Chase's father. He was the person who taught Chase everything foundational about building, the approach to materials, the philosophy of preservation over demolition, the belief that a structure worth saving is worth saving exactly because it has already survived. That's not a technique, that's a worldview. And it came from his father. Both Chase and Ashley have credited Eric as the reason they went into this work. Their grandfather was a civil engineer. Their grandmother handled the plumbing. But it was Eric who made it feel like a calling, rather than a trade. Chase lost his father 3 years before the first camera ever showed up. That means every single cabin that has been rebuilt on Maine Cabin Masters, over 80 of them, documented across 13 seasons, was done without Eric watching. Every season premiere, every renovation, every time Chase stood in front of a collapsed camp and explained why it was worth saving, his father was gone. He hasn't made grief the center of his public story. He mentions his father in passing, in podcast conversations, in the show's early press materials, in a bio on the Maine Cabin Masters website. He credits his father with the idea of wastelessness. He says Eric showed him how to be a loving husband, father, friend, and hard worker. Those are not the words of a man performing sentiment. They're the words of someone trying to pass on what he was given. Now Chase has a son named Fletcher, and as of 2025 and 2026, Fletcher is at the age where he's learning how to use nail guns and impact drivers on actual job sites. Chase has said he's actively trying to recruit Fletcher's friends into the trade as well. The cycle that started with a civil engineer grandfather has moved forward one more generation. And if you think that story ends in Maine, what Chase did in 2023 is the part that reframes why all of it matters. It started with the €1 homes. The Italian government's campaign to sell off properties in depopulating villages for a symbolic €1 got significant media coverage around 2019. Chase and Sarah had always felt a connection to Italy. They'd traveled there, loved it, kept coming back to the idea. The €1 program made the idea concrete. They started looking seriously. In spring 2023, Chase and Sarah contacted an international real estate agency specializing in the Abruzzo and Molise regions of southern Italy. They knew what they wanted: a countryside property with land, a nearby footpath for Sarah's morning walks, and enough space to fit a family of 6, Chase, Sarah, and 4 teenage kids. They found it in Molise, a region so overlooked, so removed from Italy's tourist infrastructure that locals sometimes joke it doesn't exist. The region that does not exist is an actual nickname, not an exaggeration. It's not Tuscany. It's not the Amalfi Coast. It's rural, historic, and exactly the kind of place Chase Morrill would find. The property cost roughly $97,000. Chase's stated reason for buying it then, at that specific time, was not investment, it was timing. He said publicly that all 4 of his kids were still living under the same roof, and he wanted to do a major project with them before that window closed. His oldest daughter, Maggie, was approaching college age. If he waited, the family he wanted to build this with wouldn't be in the same place anymore. He brought the Maine Cabin Masters crew, Ashley, Ryan, Dixie, Jedi, to Molise. They renovated the property, 6 episodes. Maine Cabin Masters, Building Italy, premiered on June 17, 2024, on Magnolia Network and became available for streaming on Max and Discovery Plus later that same year. The show rated an 8.8 on IMDb, an unusually high score for a renovation spin-off. Maggie has since started college. She came back to help harvest olives from the Italy property's olive trees alongside Chase's mother, Peggy. The house is now getting regular use from family and friends, and Chase has described the ongoing process of learning Italian property taxes, city gas connections, and local systems as a slow, rewarding education. What he chose to do with that house was not flip it, not rent it commercially, not monetize it. He built it for his family. And now, as of right now, in summer 2026, he's doing something with his wife that he hasn't done before. Sarah Morrill has been in the background of this story since the beginning. A registered nurse from North Andover, Massachusetts, she met Chase at the College of the Atlantic. They built a life in Wayne, Maine, in a 150-year-old farmhouse that Chase has described as being a teardown when they bought it. They kept it. They restored it. Because that's what they do. For years, Sarah's dream was to open a bed and breakfast. Chase has spoken about this publicly. It was Sarah's project, her vision, the thing she wanted. And now the Maine Cabin Masters crew is building it for her. The new spin-off, Maine Cabin Masters All In, follows Chase and Sarah as they convert a rundown property into the Waters Run Bed and Breakfast in Monmouth, Maine. The whole crew came in, Ashley on design, Ryan on construction. The same people who've been doing this since before the cameras arrived, now building something that belongs specifically to Sarah. The show is set to air on Magnolia Network in summer 2026. What makes this project different from anything they've done before is the deadline. When you renovate someone else's cabin, A delayed finish is a problem. When you're opening a bed and breakfast and reservations have already been booked, starting July 2026, the deadline is, as Chase put it, as real as you can get. He noted that this was by far one of the biggest projects they've ever tackled. The pressure is different when it belongs to your family. When the people who are going to live with the result are the people you go home to every night. Every decision carries a different weight. Season 13 of the Maine show is currently airing on Magnolia Network as of May 2026. The crew has grown to roughly 25 carpenters in the summer, with subcontractors, electricians, and excavation teams expanding the operation well beyond the original 5. Chase has said costs have risen significantly since the early seasons. Materials that used to be found on roadsides with free signs now command premiums because the salvage market has matured. What was once a frugality strategy has become a competitive advantage everyone has noticed. The Kennebec Cabin Company now has a retail store, a podcast, a website, bookable properties for fans, and a crew that looks nothing like the 5 friends who showed up to film a pilot in Vassalboro in 2016. The business has outgrown the original model without losing the thing that made the original model work. And here's what the comments kept asking. And here's the answer they never got. Until now. The title of this video is a question. What really happened to Chase Morrill from Maine Cabin Masters? And the honest answer is not what the title implies. He didn't walk away. He wasn't pushed out. There's no falling out, no canceled show, no departure. Chase Morrill is, as of 2026, more active, more expanded, and more in demand than at any point in the show's 9-year run. But that answer is incomplete if you stop there, because what really happened to Chase Morrill is a different kind of story. It's the story of a man who had no ambition to be famous, no interest in building a brand, no website, no social media, and no business plan that extended beyond the next camp that needed fixing. And then a production company called his wife's number, and everything changed. It changed in the expected ways. The ratings, the seasons, the network deals, the spin-offs. But it also changed in ways that didn't make the broadcast. His father died before any of it started. His crew faced a federal enforcement action while the cameras were still rolling. He bought a house in a region of Italy that most tourists skip, and he did it for a reason that had nothing to do with television and everything to do with the fact that his kids were growing up. His son is now old enough to swing a hammer on a real job site. His daughter was old enough to harvest olives in Italy and is now away at college. His wife's bed and breakfast has reservations starting in July. His sister's design team has expanded from 4 people to nearly a dozen. And the man himself has said, without irony, that he still has no shortage of cabins to fix and no plans to go looking for them anywhere outside of Maine. He's still the same person who told a reporter a decade ago that if the show went away tomorrow, he'd go back to work and nothing would really change. The difference now is that the work is bigger, the crew is bigger, the family is more involved. And the story he's been building, in wood and stone and plaster, in Maine and in Italy, on screen and off it, is one that his grandfather started and his son is now old enough to continue. That's what really happened. And it turns out, it's a better story than most people expected. 9 seasons in, Chase Morrill is proof that the most durable version of a career is the one built on something you'd do anyway, even if nobody was watching. Right now, he's finishing a bed and breakfast in Monmouth, Maine, with reservations he can't miss. Season 13 of the Maine show is on Magnolia. The Italy property is getting use from family, including his mother helping bring in the olive harvest. Fletcher is learning nail guns on job sites, and another spin-off is on the way. The question worth sitting with is this. Chase Morrill said early on that if the show ended tomorrow, he'd go back to work and be fine. Do you believe him? And if you were in his position, a business that started with no website and turned into a 13-season television franchise, would you be able to walk away from it all the same? Let me know below.